I'm Liam, and today I want to talk about a quiet financial line that most people cross without ever realizing it exists. A subtle threshold where small amounts of money stop solving meaningful problems and start disappearing into the background of everyday life. Imagine receiving an unexpected $500 during a stressful month. And for a moment, it feels like relief, like space to breathe, like control returning to your hands. Yet within weeks, that same money blends into routine expenses, absorbed by bills, minor upgrades, small comforts, and the endless friction of modern living, until its impact becomes difficult to experience. Is not about carelessness or lack of discipline, and it is not a story of failure, but rather a reflection of how financial pressure, lifestyle structure, and human psychology interact in ways that make certain amounts of money feel powerful at one stage of life and strangely ineffective at another. There is a concept hiding inside this pattern, something we can call the $500 threshold, a point where money shifts from being a problem solver to becoming a temporary cushion, where it no longer changes your trajectory but simply softens your landing. When income is very limited, $500 can prevent a crisis, cover rent, repair something essential, or stop a chain reaction of late fees and penalties. And in those moments, the money acts like a shield against instability. However, as responsibilities grow and financial structures become more complex, the same amount no longer removes threats but merely delays them, creating the illusion of progress while underlying pressures remain intact. This threshold is not fixed across all people because it depends on cost of living, debt structure, family obligations, and income stability. Yet the psychological shift it creates follows a remarkably consistent pattern. Human perception of money is shaped less by absolute value and more by relative pressure, meaning the usefulness of any amount depends on the size of the problems surrounding it. When financial stress is intense and immediate, even small sums feel transformative because they directly reduce uncertainty and restore a sense of control. As stability increases, however, financial challenges become structural rather than urgent, and structural problems are rarely solved by isolated injections of cash. The brain still registers the gain as positive, but the emotional relief fades faster because the money does not alter the system producing the stress. This is why a bonus that once felt life-changing can later feel routine, why small windfalls lose their emotional intensity over time, and why people often feel confused when extra income fails to deliver lasting improvement in their quality of life. Psychologically, this phenomenon is tied to adaptation and expectation. People quickly adjust to improved conditions, and once a higher baseline becomes normal, anything that does not significantly exceed that baseline feels minor. The mind recalibrates what counts as meaningful progress, raising the internal definition of what enough looks like. As a result, $500 may once have represented safety, then convenience, and later almost invisibility. Expectations expand quietly alongside income, obligations, and exposure to new standards of living, making small financial gains feel increasingly disconnected from meaningful change. This adaptation is not greed or irresponsibility, but a built-in cognitive process that helps humans normalize their environment. Though financially, it can create a persistent sense that progress is slower than it actually is. There is also a behavioral layer to this threshold that shapes how money flows through daily decisions. Smaller amounts tend to be spent rather than strategically allocated because they feel insufficient for investment or major upgrades, leading people to channel them towards consumption, minor repairs, or short-term comforts. Larger sums, in contrast, are more likely to trigger planning, comparison, and deliberate allocation because they appear capable of producing visible change. This creates a paradox where modest financial gains improve mood but rarely improve long-term position, reinforcing cycles where people feel temporarily better yet structurally unchanged. Over time, this pattern can blur awareness of where money truly makes a difference, encouraging focus on frequent small inflows rather than infrequent but transformative financial moves. The mathematical side clarifies why this threshold emerges. Consider monthly expenses that already consume most income, leaving little room for error. If fixed obligations such as housing, utilities, transportation, food, insurance, and debt payments account for nearly everything earned, then an additional $500 represents a small percentage increase relative to total outflow. A small percentage cannot significantly alter a system dominated by large recurring costs. It may cover variable expenses or reduce minor debt, but it rarely changes the fundamental ratio between income and obligations. Meaningful structural change requires altering one of three variables in a noticeable way, either increasing income consistently, reducing major fixed costs, or restructuring high-interest debt. One-time additions that do not influence these core variables provide relief without transformation. Another way to see this is through time rather than totals. If $500 covers only a few days or weeks of expenses, its influence is temporary by definition. Lasting financial stability comes from extending time horizons, building buffers that protect multiple months rather than moments. Emergency funds, investment growth, and sustainable income streams all work because they expand the duration of security, not just the intensity of a single event.
Extend your financial runway. It acts more like a pause button than a solution. The threshold appears precisely at the point where additional funds stop extending that runway in a meaningful way. Zooming out reveals that this is not merely a personal budgeting issue, but a systemic feature of modern economic life. As societies develop, essential services become more complex and expensive. Housing markets concentrate opportunity in high-cost areas, healthcare expenses grow unpredictably, and education costs rise faster than wages. These structural forces increase the baseline financial load carried by individuals, meaning that the minimum amount of money required to produce meaningful change steadily climbs over time. What once solved problems now manages symptoms, and what once felt like progress now feels like maintenance. The threshold moves upwards silently, reshaping how people experience income without them consciously noticing the shift. Social comparison amplifies this effect. Exposure to curated lifestyles through digital media expands perceptions of what normal life should include, influencing spending patterns and redefining comfort. As perceived necessities grow, discretionary income shrinks, making small financial gains feel even less impactful. The issue is not imitation, but psychological anchoring, where standards adjust to the environments people observe most frequently. This raises the emotional bar for what counts as improvement, causing modest gains to feel insignificant even when they meaningfully support stability behind the scenes. At an identity level, crossing this threshold changes how people see their relationship with money. Instead of viewing money as a tool for solving immediate problems, individuals begin seeing it as a resource for optimizing systems, managing risk, and shaping long-term direction. This shift moves attention from short-term relief towards structural design, from reacting to expenses towards engineering financial resilience. The question evolves from asking how to cover this month to asking how to reduce vulnerability across years. Once this identity transition begins, small sums are evaluated differently, not by their immediate purchasing power, but by their ability to strengthen foundations. Understanding the $500 threshold is therefore less about the number itself and more about recognizing where incremental money stops altering outcomes. Awareness allows more intentional decisions, encouraging people to pool small gains for strategic uses, direct windfalls towards high-leverage areas, and measure financial progress by structural improvements rather than momentary comfort. This perspective reduces frustration because it aligns expectations with economic reality, replacing vague disappointment with clear clearer evaluation of what different amounts can realistically accomplish. None of this implies that small amounts are meaningless because their value depends entirely on context, timing, and allocation. What changes is the strategy required to convert them into lasting impact. Money that cannot independently transform circumstances can still contribute to transformation when combined with planning, patience, and systems thinking. Recognizing thresholds simply clarifies where leverage begins and where it fades, allowing financial effort to be directed with greater precision. As financial lives become more complex, progress becomes less visible, but not less real. Stability often grows quietly through risk reduction, buffer expansion, and gradual system improvement rather than dramatic breakthroughs. When expectations adjust to recognize these subtler forms of advancement, small gains regain purpose within a larger framework rather than being judged as isolated events. The quiet power of this idea lies in its ability to reframe frustration into understanding. Feeling that small money no longer changes much is not evidence of stagnation, but a signal that financial challenges have evolved from immediate survival towards structural management. That transition, while uncomfortable, reflects movement into a different economic stage where strategy matters more than single events. I am Liam, and if this perspective helped you see money, stress, and progress with greater clarity, consider subscribing to the channel for more calm, analytical explorations of financial psychology and economic systems, where we continue examining the hidden mechanics shaping